Hello everyone, welcome to today's video, and as you can see, we'll be going over my standard deck profile featuring Bastion. So let's get straight into the ride line. Starting us off, we have Base, Fort, Rooks, and of course, Bastion himself. Now, before we get into this, I will state that there are certain cards that you can swap out considering which decks you're facing. I'll go over why I am running certain cards that I do. But it depends on which amount of decks you're facing and which kind of decks that you see in your locals or you expect to face during perhaps Springfest. So we run the basic ride line for Bastion. We want to see that top deck and hopefully get something good. You don't always, and that draw, you usually have the correct amount of grade 3s in your hand. But you have to be careful since we are running the grade 4 Apex-Surpassing sword Bastion Prime. He has similar skills to the grade 3 Bastion, but just slightly different and just slightly more powerful. So of course, since we've changed our deck up to focus around this Bastion, he has triple drive, he needs Bastions in hand or soul to activate his skill, and of course he restands entire columns instead of just one unit. So we want to capitalize on that and get as much powerful grade 3s on the field as possible so we can have 5 to 6 attacks. Then we have Apex Ruler Bastion. We're still running 3 copies of the grade 3. Considering we need a lot of Bastion names to activate Prime's ability, and of course if you can get into the Persona ride, it's a good fallback plan. So yeah, that's mainly why we still run that many copies. Not all decks still run maximum amounts. Something we do run forever probably in maximum amounts is Heavenly Sword Alden. His call out ability, his draw ability, his power buffs are insane. So we'll probably never replace Alden in this deck unless they straight up upgrade Alden. Now, a unit a lot of decks have cut out at the moment is Fasado, which I run 4 of, mainly because I like Fasado as a unit itself and his non-targetable ability. I face a lot of Dragon Empire decks. The only one that gets past this ability is Buff Sagra at this point, but decks like Gravidia, decks like Prison, they usually can't do anything against Fasado, and that's why I run him. A lot of my matchups are against these kinds of decks, and just having Fasado to stay there, annoying them, getting resources back if I do happen to need them. Against Prison it's probably a bit harder, especially since they can now take my soul away, but we deal with that as it goes. I still like Fasado. I do know he isn't run in all decks, especially with, you know, the main hitters now. Another card that we still run 4 of is Rafluk. If you get into a situation where you need that extra power buff or that extra soul, then he's your guy. I still run him at 4 because I do get moments where I just need that little extra push for Alden, and he always comes in clutch. Next up, we have 2 copies of Logrel. Honestly, it's an amazing card. That extra twin drive can really change out the game, but I don't really need him at more copies than 2, perhaps 3. Like, you have situations where that's the moment you want to go into him. Usually it's like, oh, I really need that extra push, and then I end up using him, but more often than not, he's more of a, you know, safety, all out of the window kind of card, and that's why I only run 2 copies of him. But he's a pretty good card. A card that I'm constantly debating just kicking out is Sparare. He's got extra multi-attack abilities with, you know, when he restands you gain that extra draw. He gives your other rear guard like extra power, which is fine, but honestly I'm not too sold on this card. I would rather play an extra copy of the next card, which is the Embrace Dragon, which I'm currently running at 1. But, you know, when you're facing prison, you need cards to Soul Blast. Usually people use the Darkstrain Dragon, but I prefer running the Order. Therefore, you know, it's more of a, you know, choose for yourself. I would consider running the Embrace Dragon at more copies, but it does come up from time to time, so it's more of a personal preference, I suppose. Next up, I'm running 2 copies of the Pride to Protect, which is the order that allows you to get boost for the rest of the game. So I like playing this card more than Darkstrain, but I do see the advantages to running Darkstrain if you're facing a lot of prison decks and you don't want to, you know, offer them that soul. But you know, that's a personal preference, like I said before. Next up, of course, we're running 4 PGs. Then we are running our Overtrigger. I am currently running 3 fronts, again for that power buff, and I usually tend to have a pretty healthy hand. But I am considering switching it up for a little bit and perhaps running 4 draws and then cutting out all my 8 crits at the moment. So I would be cutting out one of this and the 3 fronts. But, you know, in my testing, I honestly didn't have too many issues with my hand, and therefore I'm considering it. I want to see what the other decks beyond my locals would give to face this deck, and therefore, you know, testing has been a bit difficult. But from what I've seen personally, this is a pretty good lineup. There are cards that I can agree with that should be switched out. That's the fun part about this deck, is that you have so many options and so many different decks require different matchups to be had. Therefore, I think, you know, people should experiment with the different cards more, and therefore, you know, here's my take on it. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Stay radiant, bye bye.